Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Yoma Daf It's a short daf. It's the last daf in Perek Tarf B'Kalpi, the fourth Perek of the Masechta. It ends the Perek, and it has three main subjects. First of all, a statement of Rabbi Meir that the pieces of karbanos that came out of the fire are put back into the fire. The Gemara will discuss what days you could put that in. Is it Shabbos, day after Shabbos, Yom Kippur? When could you return it to the fire? Next, the Gemara will discuss when the later parts of a carbon oila are allowed to be put into the fire, and when they are not put into the fire. The questions will be betuma or on Shabbos. And then lastly, the Perek will end off by asking what happens if somebody takes fire off the Mizbeach and puts it out. We know you're not allowed to put out the fire of the Mizbeach. What happens if it's off the Mizbeach? So the Gemara begins. We had been discussing up till now that there were a number of fires on the Mizbeach, 3, 4, 5 on Yom Kippur, depending who you hold like. Rabbi Meir's opinion is that there were 5 on Yom Kippur. The fifth one was to burn the pieces of the karbanos from yesterday, which didn't burn completely. You put them back in the fire on this extra fire that burns them up. So Marco is a statement of Rabbi Lazar, the name of Bar Kapar, that says that Rabbi Meir holds that if you have extra pieces of a carbon oila, you put them in the fire. So you can ask, obviously that's what he said. What are you adding? We said you put them in the fire. So Gemara says the chiddush that he's adding is that even psulin, even there are certain types of psulin, certain types of disqualifications that apply to karbanos, where the halacha is that if you find out about the psul, or you have the psul before it goes into the fire, you don't put them in the fire. But if they end up in the fire, then you don't take them out. So the question is here, you had something like this psul, and it's already in the fire, and it didn't get fully burned. So do you put it back into the fire? So the chiddush is that even though you wouldn't put it in the fire in the first place because of this psul, since it's already partially burned, you do put it into the fire over here. And the Gemara says that's only if it's already partially burned. If it went into the fire, but it didn't show at least some signs of burning, you wouldn't put it back into the fire. The Gemara says a different version of that's true, but for anything, any part of any carbon, if it came out of the fire without having actually been burned, then if it didn't get a chance to burn yet, then you wouldn't put it back into the fire on this extra fire that is created here. So now the Gemara says, and then this halacha, you're allowed to put the pieces back into the fire. There's another chiddush here, maybe from what Rav Elazar was saying in the name of Bar Kapar. There's another chiddush that you're even allowed to do it on Shabbos. The Gemara says, that's not a chiddush. Our Brisa quoted Rabbi Meir, said you're allowed to do it on Yom Kippur. If you're allowed to do it on Yom Kippur, you're for sure allowed to do it on Shabbos. So Gemara says, no, there's still a chiddush there, because that Yom Kippur could have been the day after Shabbos. Could have been Yom Kippur that falls on a Sunday. Now, in our days with our calendar, Yom Kippur can't fall on a Sunday, but in the days of Chazal, Yom Kippur could fall on a Sunday when we were Makadosh Chodesh by seeing the moon. So if Yom Kippur fell on a Sunday, so Yom Kippur is the day after Shabbos. So the carbon whose pieces need to be put back in was a carbon that was brought on Shabbos. So to put a Shabbos carbon back in the fire in Yom Kippur, I could hear. It's a Shabbos carbon, Yom Kippur, they're both Shabbosim. However, if you have Yom Kippur during the week, maybe you wouldn't put the pieces of yesterday's carbon back in the fire. Maybe you wouldn't put a weekday carbon back into the fire on Yom Kippur, and you wouldn't put a weekday carbon back into the fire on Shabbos. So maybe that's a chiddush here. The Brisa doesn't tell me that I could put a weekday carbon where yesterday's carbon was a weekday carbon. I could put it back into the fire on Shabbos or on Yom Kippur, and that's what Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Bar Kapara, is teaching me over here. So the Gemara says that Rava scoffs at this. And Rava says, why would you say this? The Brisa quoting Rabbi Meir said, B'chol yom, every day there were 4 fires. In Yom Kippur there was 5 fires. Obviously we're talking about no matter what day of the week it is, even if the previous day was a weekday. So that cannot be what this halacha is at all. Now, based on this, Rava and our previous answer, they both hold that you are allowed to put weekday karbanos, yesterday's karbanos, which are weekday karbanos, you're allowed to put them into the fire on Yom Kippur and on Shabbos. The Gemara says Rav Huna disagrees. The Gemara is going to get into this Rav Huna here. Rav Huna had a statement where he said that the beginning of a carbon tamid is doiche, it pushes away. The end of a carbon tamid is not doiche. What does this mean? The beginning is doiche, the end is not doiche. So Gemara says the machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rabbah what he means. According to Rav Chizda, we're talking about Shabbos. And we say the beginning of a carbon is daicha, we mean that Shabbos is carbon tamid, the beginning of the carbon tamid. When you're making the carbon tamid in the first place, you're allowed to put it in the fire on Shabbos. A Shabbos carbon goes in the fire on Shabbos. However, end of the carbon refers to yesterday's carbon that didn't get burned properly. That doesn't go back into the fire. Friday's carbon, if it still has pieces that are unburned left over on Shabbos, you don't put it back into the fire. That's what it means when we say the end is not the deicha. The end doesn't push away the Isser and Shabbos of burning. So that would be disagreeing with what we've said up to now, where we have said that you could put the pieces back into the fire on Shabbos. But this is only one version of what Rav Huna meant. The other version is put forward by Rabbah. Rabbah says he's not talking about Shabbos altogether. He's talking about Tumah. The beginning is daicha means that if you have only tamei kahanim, you could do the first avodos of a carbon tamid, even if it's betuma. We have a rule tumah hutra betzibor that the isser of doing karbanos with tumah is pushed off when it's a congregational thing and there's no other option. So you're allowed to do the zrika. You're allowed to do all the blood avodos, all the steps that have to do with the blood going on a mizbech, but putting the fat, the meat and the pieces and the fats actually into the fire, which is the last avoda of a carbon tamid, that you would not do bituma. So we have two totally different explanations as to what Rav Huna meant when he said that the end is not daicha. Is he talking about that you cannot put a carbon back in the fire if it's on Shabbos, or is he saying you can't do the last avoda if it's bituma situation? So now Abaye has to kash over here. Abaye says both Rav Chizda's pshat and Rabbah's pshat and Rav Huna both have a problem, and that's because the source that you can push away these halachas of Tumah and Shabbos come from the same word. It's from the word moyadai. You're supposed to do the carbon b'moyadai in its right time. So it says that relative to Tumah, and it says that relative to Shabbos. Moyadai exists, and it says you should do it in its time even though there's a problem. That should say that both Tumah and Shabbos can be pushed off for the final stages of a karbanis. It's a kasha on both of them, because Rav Chizda says you can only push off Shabbos and not Tumah, and Rabbah says you can only push off Tumah and not Shabbos. There shouldn't be a difference between the two. So Gemara says that Rabbah answered the kasha, and Rabbah said it's not a kasha, not on me, and not on Rav Chizda. We both have a logical reason for the reason that we differentiate between Tumah and Shabbos. What is it? So for me, I'm looking at the Friday carbon itself. The Friday carbon could have been brought on Friday. The beginning steps of the carbon could not have been brought on a Shabbos. A Friday carbon is never brought on Shabbos. The Friday afternoon carbon tamid can't be burned on Shabbos. It has to be in the fire before sundown. So therefore, the original steps of this carbon couldn't be done on Shabbos. There's a logical reason to say that the later steps can't be done on Shabbos either. However, Tumah, the beginning steps of a carbon could be done B'tumah, so the later steps should also be able to do B'tumah. I don't see a reason to differentiate between the two. That's my logic, and that's why I say that Shabbos could be pushed off in its later steps of the carbon, but Tumah cannot be pushed off in the later steps of the carbon, simply by learning it from the early steps of the carbon. Now, Rav Chizda's logic is different. Rav Chizda says there's a difference between us allowing to push away Shabbos and allowing us to push away Tumah, and that's that whenever we push away Shabbos, we say that it's hutra, it's completely permitted. That means that Shabbos is not a problem altogether. It's totally mutter. It's not we're allowing you to do something, but it's really a problem, but we let you override and get away with it. No. Shabbos is mutter. It's totally fine. There's no problem. You're allowed to do Shabbos when it comes to karbanos. Therefore, he will say, and he'll understand, that there is no such thing as you can't cancel Shabbos. That's not correct thing to say. Shabbos is pushed away completely in its beginning steps and in its later steps. Where do we have a problem? And that's Tumah. When we say that the later steps of a carbon tamid are not cancelled, that they don't cancel, we mean it doesn't cancel Tumah, because Tumah is not hutra b'tzibur. Tumah is pushed off b'tzibur. We allow you to violate the Tumah laws only when we're forced to, but the later steps we're not forced to. You don't have to do the final step. You could just do the blood, and that's enough of an avoda, and therefore you cannot put the pieces on the mizbeach if you have a situation of Tumah. Okay, that's that discussion. The Gemara adds here a final line, and it says that also the main steps, the main kapara of the carbon is the blood, and that's why we have to do that. But the later steps is not the kapara, and therefore we don't have to do it so much. Now the Gemara brings a machlokes Abaye and Rava about what happens if somebody takes coals off the mizbech in order to use them for the menorah or for the ketoret. So he legally takes them off the mizbech and then he puts them out. Well, we know that the fire on the mizbech has to burn. You're not allowed to put it out. This person has coals and he took it off the mizbech and he put them out. So What is halacha? Did he violate the Isser or not? So the Gemara says the machlokas between Abaye and Rava whether or not he violated the Isser, and there's two versions of this. Where is the machlokas Abaye and Rava? Is it talking about where he put the fire out, he put the coals out off the mizbeach? He first took it off of the mizbeach and then he put them out down on the floor. That's where there's a machlokas. But if he did it on the mizbeach, everybody would agree that he definitely violated the Isser. He put it out on the mizbeach itself. There it clearly says he's not allowed to. Or is the machlokas on top of the mizbeach? But if he did it on the floor, meaning he separated the coal out of the fire of the mizbeach, and he has just coals, and he put them out, that's a machlokas between Abaye and Rava. But if it's on the floor, then everybody would agree that it's permitted. It's not a problem to put the coals out. There's two versions of where this machlokas is. On the mizbeach is definitely much worse than on the floor. The question is, do they agree that on the floor is mutter, and they argue about on the mizbeach, or do they agree that on the mizbeach is aser, and they argue about on the floor? Either way, Abaye is the one who says that it's aser, and Rav is the one who says that it's mutter. Now the Gemara is a kasha according to both versions. So that we have Rav Nachman, who says that on the floor it's aser. So according to the version that they didn't argue about on the floor of the Beis HaMikdash, so Rav Nachman doesn't fit with anybody. According to the other version that they do argue, Rav Nachman comes out like Abaye, which is a problem, because the halacha is like Rav Nachman, and the halacha is like Rava against Abaye. So how could we have two conflicting rules as to what the halacha is? So the Gemara answers, the Gemara says it's different. Rav Nachman was talking about where you took the coal out of the fire off the mizbeach for no reason. There it's much more problematic to put it out. Abaye and Rava are arguing about where you took it off for a mitzvah. You took it off to light the menorah or to bring kitaris on the mizbeach hapanimi. There's a machlokas, and there Rava says that's permitted, or according to the other version, they both say that it's permitted, and Rav Nachman will agree to that. He was only saying that it's aser in a situation where you took it off not for any mitzvah.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.